The ground shook beneath the small town of Millbrook as something impossible tore through the fabric of reality. Dr. Sarah Chun was the first to see it. She had been driving home from her late shift at the research facility when the sky split open like a wound. A massive ring of blue light appeared in the middle of the empty wheat field beside the highway. The light was so bright that it turned night into day. Sarah stopped her car and stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. The portal was enormous. It stood nearly 50 meters tall, and its edges crackled with energy that looked like lightning frozen in time. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with an ancient power that humans had never seen before. Sarah pulled out her phone and started recording. Her hands were shaking, but she knew the world needed to see this. Within minutes, the first creatures emerged. They were tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their eyes were completely black, and their mouths were filled with rows of sharp teeth. They carried weapons that looked like spears made of bone and metal fused together. The creatures moved with purpose, spreading out across the field like soldiers securing a landing zone. Sarah ran back to her car and called the emergency services. Her voice was barely a whisper as she described what she was seeing. The operator thought she was joking at first, but then the reports started flooding in from other witnesses. Within an hour, the military was on its way. General Marcus Webb arrived with the first wave of soldiers, just as dawn broke over the horizon. He had seen many strange things in his 30 years of service, but nothing had prepared him for this. The portal was still active, and more creatures were pouring through every few minutes. They had already killed several farmers who had come to investigate the lights. Their bodies lay scattered across the field, torn apart by those bone spears. Webb ordered his men to form a perimeter around the portal. The creatures noticed the military presence and began to organize themselves into formation. There were already hundreds of them, and more kept coming. Webb knew they needed to act fast before this became a full-scale invasion. The first battle began at noon. The creatures charged the military line with a terrible screaming sound that hurt human ears. They moved faster than any human could run, and their weapons cut through standard body armor like it was paper. Dozens of soldiers fell in the first wave. But then the humans adapted. Webb called in air support. Attack helicopters appeared over the tree line and opened fire with their heavy machine guns. The creatures had never seen such weapons before. Their bone spears were useless against enemies they could not reach. The bullets tore through their ranks, and for the first time, the invaders began to fall. But the creatures learned quickly. They retreated back through the portal, dragging their dead with them. Webb thought they had won, but he was wrong. The portal remained open, pulsing with that strange blue light. Something bigger was coming. Dr. Chun had stayed nearby, watching everything from a safe distance. She had been studying the symbols on the portal, comparing them to ancient texts she had access to through her university connections. The symbols were similar to ones found in archaeological sites around the world, sites that dated back over 10,000 years. Someone had built portals like this before, long before recorded history began. She approached General Webb with her findings. The portals were not natural phenomena. They were technology created by a civilization that had existed before humanity rose from the caves. And if these creatures had access to that technology, they might have access to much more. Webb listened carefully. He was not a man who dismissed ideas just because they sounded impossible. He had just watched alien creatures pour out of a hole in reality. Anything was possible now. That night, the portal changed color. The blue light turned red, and the ground began to shake again. Something massive was moving on the other side. Webb ordered his men to fall back as the first of the larger creatures emerged. This new being stood over 20 meters tall. It had 4 arms, each ending in hands that could crush a tank. Its skin was covered in thick plates that looked like natural armor. It roared as it stepped through the portal, and the sound shattered windows in buildings 5 kilometers away. The military opened fire with everything they had. Tanks fired their main guns. Missiles streaked through the air. Aircraft dropped bombs. The giant creature stumbled under the assault, green blood pouring from dozens of wounds. But it did not fall. It reached down and picked up a tank, crushing it in its hands before throwing it at a line of soldiers. Webb knew they needed bigger weapons. He made a call to the Pentagon, requesting authorization for tactical nuclear strikes. The request was denied. The portal was too close to civilian populations. They needed another way. Dr. Chun came up with the answer. If the portal was technology, then it could be shut down. She had been studying the symbols and believed she understood how they worked. The portal needed power to stay open, and that power came from somewhere on this side. If they could find the power source and destroy it, the portal would collapse. Webb gave her a team of soldiers and scientists. They spread out across the region, searching for anything that matched the energy signature of the portal. Meanwhile, the battle continued. More giant creatures emerged, and the military was slowly being pushed back. Sarah found the power source in an underground chamber beneath an ancient temple that had been buried for millennia. Earthquake sensors had detected a hollow space beneath the wheat field, and drilling revealed a staircase leading down into darkness. The chamber was filled with more of those glowing symbols, and in its center sat a crystal the size of a car. The crystal pulsed with the same blue light as the portal. It was clearly the power source, but it was also protected. Several of the smaller creatures stood guard around it, their black eyes watching the entrance. Sarah and her team would have to fight their way through. What happened next would later be called the Battle of the Chamber. 12 soldiers and 3 scientists against 40 alien creatures in a confined space. The odds were terrible, but humans had faced worse odds before and survived. The soldiers moved with precision and courage. They used grenades to break the enemy formation, then pushed forward with their rifles blazing. The creatures fought back with savage fury, but they could not match human tactics and discipline. One by one, they fell. Sarah reached the crystal just as the last creature was killed. She placed explosive charges around its base, while the surviving soldiers held off reinforcements coming down the stairs. The timer was set for 3 minutes. They ran. They made it out of the chamber, just as the explosion ripped through the underground space. The crystal shattered, and its light went out forever. Above ground, the portal flickered and began to shrink. The giant creatures roared in confusion as their gateway home started to collapse. They tried to retreat, but the portal was closing too fast. Many of them were caught halfway through when it finally snapped shut. Their bodies were cut in half, falling to the ground in heaps of green blood and alien flesh. The remaining creatures on Earth were now trapped. Without their portal, without their reinforcements, they were alone against the full might of human civilization. The battle lasted 3 more days. Military forces from around the world converged on Millbrook, bringing weapons and soldiers from every nation. The creatures fought hard, but they could not win. Humans had something they did not understand. Humans could adapt. Humans could learn from their mistakes. Humans could work together even when they came from different countries and spoke different languages. The creatures had never faced an enemy like this before. General Webb led the final assault personally. He had lost many good soldiers in this fight, and he wanted to be there when it ended. The last of the giant creatures fell at sunset on the 3rd day, brought down by concentrated fire from dozens of tanks and aircraft. Dr. Chun stood beside him as they watched the creature die. She felt no joy, only relief. The invasion had been stopped, but at a terrible cost. Over 2,000 soldiers had died, along with hundreds of civilians. The small town of Millbrook was destroyed, reduced to rubble by the fighting. But humanity had survived. More than that, humanity had won against an enemy from another world. The news spread across the globe, and people everywhere celebrated. For the first time in history, humans knew they were not alone in the universe. And for the first time, They knew they could defend themselves. In the weeks that followed, scientists studied the remains of the creatures and their technology. They learned much about the portal system and the civilization that had created it. The creators were long gone, extinct millions of years ago. But their technology remained, scattered across the galaxy on hundreds of different worlds. The creatures that had invaded Earth were not the creators. They were scavengers, using technology they did not fully understand. They had found a portal on their world and activated it, hoping to find new lands to conquer. Instead, they had found humanity. Dr. Chun led the team that rebuilt the portal technology. Within 5 years, humans had constructed their own portal, smaller but fully functional. It connected Earth to a network of gateways spanning thousands of light years. Suddenly, the stars were within reach. General Webb retired from military service and became the first commander of the newly formed Earth Defense Force. His job was to make sure that what happened at Millbrook never happened again. Under his leadership, humanity built defenses around every portal they discovered. But humans did not stop there. They explored. They expanded. They met other species, some friendly and some hostile. And every time they faced a challenge, they remembered the Battle of Millbrook. They remembered that humans could adapt, learn, and overcome. The creatures that had invaded Earth were eventually traced back to their homeworld. Humanity offered them peace, a chance to join the growing community of species that now traveled through the portal network. Some of the creatures accepted. Others refused and continued to wage war. Those that chose war discovered something terrible. Humans were not just good at defending themselves. Humans were also good at fighting back. The species that had once poured through a glowing gate to conquer, Earth now found themselves facing an enemy they could not defeat. Dr. Sarah Chun watched from her office on the first human space station as ships departed through the portal, carrying soldiers and diplomats to distant worlds. She was old now, her hair gray and her body tired. But her eyes still held the same spark of curiosity that had driven her to study the portal symbols all those years ago. Humanity had changed. They were no longer alone, no longer confined to a single planet. They had taken their place among the stars, and they had earned that place through courage and sacrifice. The ancient portal that had once threatened to destroy them had become their doorway to the universe. And somewhere out there, on worlds yet undiscovered, other species told stories about the humans. Stories about a people who had faced invasion and refused to surrender. Stories about a civilization that had turned defeat into victory. Stories about a species that, when pushed to the brink of extinction, had pushed back harder than anyone thought possible. The portal had opened to bring destruction. Instead, it had brought humanity's awakening.